My name is Isaiah Coleman, but my friends, the ones who are still around, they call me Ike. I'm 70 years old, and for the last 6 months, I've been watching my 2 sons and their wives look at me, not as a father, but as a bank account with a rapidly approaching expiration date. Last month, they invited me to a fancy dinner at a restaurant where the plates are bigger than the meals. It wasn't to check on their grieving father. It was to present me with a glossy brochure for a retirement home and a detailed plan to sell the house my wife Rosemary and I built with our own hands. I just smiled, sipped my water, and told them I'd think about it. The very next morning I called my lawyer, and that brings us to now. We're all sitting in our conference room, the air thick with greed, and I've just handed them a folder. They thought it was my will, a preview of the jackpot they were about to hit. It's not. It's an itemized invoice for their disrespect, a receipt for their greed, and they've just started screaming. Before I tell you exactly what was in that folder and what my lawyer said next that made them go completely silent, please let me know in the comments where you're listening to my story from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe that respect is something you earn, not something you inherit. To understand their screams, you have to understand the silence that came before them. After Rosemary passed, the silence in our house was a physical thing. It was heavy, and the only thing that ever broke it was the ringing of the telephone. It was always one of them, always wanting something. The first call that week came on a Tuesday. It was Brenda, my oldest son, Malik's wife. Her voice was like cheap syrup, sticky and unnaturally sweet. Ike, how are you feeling, sweetheart? Are you eating right? I worry about you all alone in that big house. I told her I was fine. I'd been managing on my own for 70 years. I could still make myself a sandwich. She laughed a brittle sound. Of course you can. You're so strong. That's what Malik always says. My dad is the strongest man I know. That's why we felt we could come to you with this. It's an opportunity, Ike. A once-in-a-lifetime real estate deal, but we have to move fast. We're just a little short on the capital. $50,000 would close it for us. Think of it as a loan, of course, an investment in our future. I looked at my hands, the knuckles swollen, the skin like old leather. These hands had built a company, Coleman & Sons Masonry. I remember a job back in '95, a brutal winter laying a foundation for a bank downtown. The wind coming off the East River felt like it was made of glass. The bonus I got for finishing that job ahead of schedule, despite the weather, was $50,000. I'd come home half frozen, and Rosemary had drawn a hot bath for me. She'd wrapped my hands and told me, "This is for our boy's future, Ike. All of it." And now Brenda was asking for that same amount with the ease of someone ordering coffee. I told her I'd think about it. That was my mistake. Thinking about it was a signal to them that the vault was open. The next day, the phone rang again. This time it was Tiffany, my youngest son, Jamal's wife. Tiffany didn't bother with the sweet talk. She was a real estate agent, and she talked to me like I was a stubborn client. Ike, hi. I was just looking at the comps in your neighborhood. They're insane. A 2-bedroom fixer-upper just sold for $900,000. Your place with its lot size. You're sitting on a gold mine. We really need to talk about unlocking that equity. You don't need all that space. We could get you into a beautiful, secure condo, and the rest of the capital could be put to work. It's just lazy money otherwise. Lazy money. I looked out the window at the rose garden, and Rosemary had planted from seedlings. I remembered us mixing the concrete for the foundation ourselves, our initials scratched into a corner that was now hidden under the porch. I remembered bringing our boys home from the hospital to this house. Each brick, each floorboard was a piece of our history, and she called it lazy money. I told her I'd think about it 2 for 2. The sharks were circling. The final call in that 3-day blitz was from my firstborn, Malik. He didn't ask for money. He was too proud for that. He let his wife do the dirty work. Instead, he complained. He complained about his boss, about his job in middle management at some logistics company. "It's a dead end, Dad," he said, his voice heavy with self-pity. "I'm meant for more than this. I have your ambition, your vision, but I'm stuck, man. Just stuck in the rat race. My vision," I wanted to laugh. My vision had involved getting up at 4 a.m. every morning for 40 years. My vision involved hauling bricks and mixing mortar until my back screamed. I had a vision, all right. It was the sign I had custom made when the boys were in high school. A big proud sign that read Coleman & Sons Masonry. I hung it over the entrance to the yard where I parked the truck and the mixers. I took them to job sites after school and on weekends. I wanted to teach them the trade. Teach them the dignity of building something real with their own hands. I wanted to give them a kingdom, but they didn't want it. Malik complained that the dust messed with his allergies. Jamal, who was always softer, said the work was too dirty, too hard. They wanted clean hands. They wanted college degrees that led to corner offices. They looked at my life's work and saw only dirt and sweat. So I took their names off the sign. It just became Coleman Masonry. I understood. A father is supposed to want more for his children. So Rosemary and we paid for their expensive colleges. We helped with the down payments on their suburban houses. We gave them the life of clean hands they wanted. A few years ago, with my back finally giving out, I sold the business and the properties we'd accumulated. The final number after taxes was $2.1 million. It was the money from the kingdom my sons had rejected, and now they had returned not to claim the throne, but to strip the castle for cash. After Malik's call, the phone was quiet for a day. I tried to find some peace in my workshop, the smell of sawdust and wood oil, a small comfort, but I knew it wasn't over. They were coordinating, strategizing, and sure enough, the call came that evening. It was Malik again, his voice different. It was firm, organized. "Dad," he said, "we've all been talking. Me, Jamal, Brenda, and Tiffany. And we're worried about you. We're very, very worried. We've booked a table for dinner on Friday night at the Sterling. We need to have a real talk. A family meeting about your future, for your own good." There it was. The final polite, loving threat. A family meeting. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. But I also felt something else. A strange clarity. The fog of grief was finally lifting, and I was seeing my sons for exactly who they were. I knew it was an ambush, and I decided right then and there that I was going to walk into it. But I wasn't going to walk in unarmed. "That sounds lovely, son," I said, my voice calm. "I'll be there." That Friday, I put on the Goodwill sweater Rosemary had bought me for my last birthday and drove to the restaurant. It was called the Sterling, the kind of place Tiffany probably saw in a magazine. It wasn't warm or welcoming. It was an exercise in expensive, uncomfortable, modern design. The chairs were hard, the lighting was dim, and the music sounded like a robot having a panic attack. It was the perfect place for an ambush. They were already there, seated at a round table in the center of the room, a little island of predators waiting for their prey. They all stood up when I approached, their smiles wide and brittle. They hugged me, but their hugs had bones in them. All angles and agendas. "Dad, you look great," Malik said, clapping me on the shoulder a little too hard. "Ike, so wonderful to see you out of the house," Brenda cooped, her eyes scanning my sweater, probably calculating its cost. The dinner conversation was a carefully choreographed dance of meaningless questions. They asked how I was sleeping, but started talking about their own stressful work weeks before I could answer. They asked if I was eating well, then Jamal launched into a long story about a new diet Tiffany had him on. They weren't having a conversation with me. They were performing for each other, each one playing their part in the production of the caring family. Brenda, as always, led the charge. She talked about a charity gala she was organizing. Tiffany talked about a multi-million-dollar property she was about to close on. It was all designed to make them sound important, successful, and responsible. It was designed to make me feel old, out of touch, and dependent, a relic from another time who couldn't possibly manage his own affairs. I just nodded and sipped my water. I was a rock in the middle of a stream, and I let the water of their words just flow around me. I watched the way Brenda would glance at Malik for approval after making a point. I saw the quick, nervous look Jamal gave Tiffany before he spoke. They were a team, and their goal was sitting right in front of them. Finally, after the plates were cleared away, Malik leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the white tablecloth as if he were about to announce a corporate merger. The performance was over. The real meeting was about to begin. "Dad," he said, his voice taking on that serious, condescending tone he probably practiced in the mirror. "The reason we're all here tonight, the real reason, is that we're worried." Malik let the word worried hang in the air for a moment, letting its fake sincerity settle over the table. Then Brenda, his wife, took her cue perfectly. She reached into her expensive leather handbag and pulled out a glossy folder, placing it on the table with the reverence of a priest presenting a holy text. She slid it in front of me. On the cover, an elegant gold script, were the words, "Golden Meadows Retirement Community," under a picture of two smiling, silver-haired strangers playing chess in a sun-drenched garden. "We're worried you're lonely, Ike." Brenda began, her voice dripping with practiced empathy. "We're worried about you in that big house all by yourself. The stairs, the yard work, the upkeep. It's too much for one person. We want you to have peace of mind. We want to have peace of mind knowing you're safe and cared for. She opened the folder. Inside were pictures of sterile-looking rooms, a community dining hall that looked like a hotel cafeteria, and a schedule of activities that included things like chair yoga and bingo night. It was a blueprint for a life where every minute was managed a beautifully packaged prison. Golden Meadows isn't just a facility, Ike. It's a community, she continued, pointing to a photo of a smiling nurse. They have 24-hour medical staff on site, 3 chef-prepared meals a day, social events. Think of it. No more cooking, no more cleaning, no more worrying about a leaky roof or a broken furnace. It's like a permanent vacation, a resort. You've worked so hard your entire life. You deserve to be pampered. You deserve this. I stared at the pictures, but I wasn't seeing them. I was seeing my workshop, the smell of fresh-cut oak, the satisfaction of a perfect dovetail joint. I was seeing Rosemary's garden, my hands in the soil, feeling the earth she had tended for 40 years. They weren't offering me a vacation. They were offering me a waiting room for death, a place where men like me, men who had built things, went when their children decided they were no longer useful. Then Tiffany, my son Jamal's wife, took her turn. If Brenda was the emotional appeal, Tiffany was the cold, hard logic. She slid her chair forward, all business. Now, I know what you're thinking, Ike. This level of care is a significant investment, and it is. But the best part is, it won't cost you a thing. In fact, this plan will make you money. She pulled out her phone, tapping on a calculator app. I've run the numbers. The market in your Queens neighborhood is on fire. It's one of the hottest areas in the 5 boroughs right now. Your house with the double lot. It's a developer's dream. We could list it tomorrow and start a bidding war. We could easily clear 2 million, maybe more. Jamal, my youngest, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up, his eyes avoiding mine. We just want you to be comfortable, Dad. No more financial worries ever. Comfortable. They wanted to sell the diary of my life, the very heart of my marriage, to their mother, so I could be comfortable. Brenda delivered the final part of the pitch, the part that tied it all together in a neat, selfish bow. The money from the sale will more than cover the Golden Meadows entry fee and the monthly dues for the rest of your life, she said, her smile never faltering. And the remainder, the substantial remainder, we can put into a family trust. We'll manage it, invest it, grow it. It will be the start of a real legacy for the Coleman family, for your grandchildren. You'll be securing their futures. They were going to bulldoze my legacy and use the rubble to build their own, and they had the nerve to say it was all for me. The audacity of it was breathtaking. I looked at their faces, all 4 of them leaning forward, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of their perfect airtight plan. They weren't asking me, they were telling me. They had already made the decision. They had already sold the house in their minds. They had already moved me into that sterile room with the bingo schedule. I was no longer a person. I was an asset to be liquidated. I let the silence hang in the air after their presentation, a heavy blanket of unspoken truths. I looked at the glossy photos of Golden Meadows, at the smiling strangers in the sterile rooms, and then I looked at the faces of my children. They were waiting, expectant, like a jury that had already delivered its verdict and was just waiting for the condemned to acknowledge it. I pushed the folder back to the center of the table. This house, I said, my voice low and steady, is more than just money. It's more than equity. It's your mother's rose garden. It's the pencil marks on the kitchen door frame where we measured you every year on your birthdays. It's our history. It's your history. For a brief second, I saw a flicker of something in my youngest son, Jamal's eyes, a hint of shame. He shifted uncomfortably in his expensive chair and looked at his wife. He's right, Tiff, he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. Maybe we should slow down. It's a lot to take in. But Tiffany wasn't having it. She shot him a look that could curdle milk, a look of pure, undiluted annoyance. Then she turned to me, her smile a thin, sharp line. Oh, please, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Don't be so sentimental, Ike. It's not history. It's a depreciating asset in a rapidly appreciating neighborhood. You have to be logical about this. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with the thrill of her own brilliance. Dad, listen. Think about it. The neighborhood is changing. That house is a gold mine just sitting there collecting dust. It's a teardown, really. What a developer could do with that lot. But even if we just sell it as is. She paused for effect, delivering the line she thought was her masterstroke. We could get a nice, quiet white family in there, someone who fits the new demographic. It would really increase the property value for everyone in the area. It's about maximizing the return. It's what any smart investor would do. And there it was. In that moment, all the noise in the crowded restaurant faded away. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of other conversations, the awful robotic music had all dissolved into a dull, distant hum. The only thing I could hear was her voice replaying those words in my head. A nice, quiet white family, someone who fits the new demographic. It wasn't just about the money. It was about eraser. They wanted to erase me from the house. They wanted to erase 48 years of a black family's life, of our struggle and our success from the neighborhood we helped build. They wanted to replace our story with one they felt was more valuable, more appropriate, more profitable. I looked at Jamal, my son, and I watched him shrink under his wife's gaze, saying nothing. He was a stranger to me. They all were. The deep aching hurt I had felt for the past 6 months didn't disappear. It transformed. It cooled and hardened into something else, something solid and heavy and powerful. It was a cold, clean rage, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that plans. I looked at them, all 4 of them. My gaze started with Tiffany. There was no anger in my eyes. Not anymore. I just looked at her the way a scientist might look at an insect under a microscope. A curious, passionless observation of a creature driven by simple, predictable instincts. Then I moved to Brenda, the smug satisfaction still plastered on her face. She held my gaze, confident, believing she had orchestrated this whole thing perfectly. She had, just not with the outcome she was expecting. I turned to Malik, my firstborn, a man who wore his father's ambition like a costume without understanding the sweat and sacrifice that gave it shape. Finally, I looked at Jamal, my youngest son. And in his eyes, I saw the ghost of the little boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy who cried when he scraped his knee. He couldn't meet my gaze. He looked down at his plate, the shame rolling off him in waves. And I knew that his weakness was the greatest betrayal of all. In that moment, something inside me settled. The chaotic storm of hurt and anger turned into a dead calm sea. In my heart, a wall went up, not a wall of brick and mortar. This one was made of something colder, harder, and permanent. The family I had loved, the one I had grieved for, was gone. These were strangers wearing the faces of my sons, and I knew I couldn't fight them on their terms. I couldn't scream or argue. That's what they wanted. They wanted me to be the emotional, irrational old man. No, I would play their game and I would win. I picked up my fork and took a slow, deliberate bite of the cold dessert that sat in front of me. I chewed, swallowed, and then took a sip of water. I carefully folded my linen napkin and placed it beside my plate. I looked up and met Brenda's impatient eyes. A small, polite smile touched my lips, a smile that didn't come anywhere near my eyes. "Thank you all for your concern," I said, my voice even and calm, revealing nothing. "You've given me a lot to think about." I paused, letting them lean in, hungry for their victory. "I will need some time to consider your generous offer." The drive home from the restaurant was a blur. I don't remember the traffic or the turns I made. It was as if the truck knew its own way home, leaving me alone with the fire that was building in my chest. I walked into the empty house, the silence I had once found, so deafening, now feeling like a welcome cloak of privacy. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the dark rooms, my hand trailing along the walls, feeling the texture of the plaster, the cool wood of the door frames. This was my home, mine and Rosemary's, and they thought they could just take it. They thought they could just package me up and ship me off, then sell our life to the highest bidder. The arrogance of it, the profound bottomless disrespect. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the eraser. Tiffany's words echoed in my head, a poisonous refrain. A nice, quiet white family. They wanted to scrub us from the record. They looked at 48 years of hard work, of raising a family, of building a community, and all they saw was an obstacle to a bigger payday. They looked at their own father, their own history, and saw a roadblock. The hurt was still there, a deep, heavy stone in my gut, but it was no longer the soft, weeping wound of grief. It was something harder, something sharper. It was the whetstone on which my anger was being honed to a razor's edge. I went to the old oak bookshelf in the den, the one I built the year Jamal was born. I ran my fingers over the spines of Rosemary's books. She was a reader, history, biographies, novels. She always said, "A person who doesn't know their history is like a tree with no roots." My sons had forgotten their roots. They had severed them willingly. My hand stopped on a thick photo album bound in worn blue leather. I pulled it from the shelf and sat down in my favorite armchair, the one with the permanent impression of my body worn into the cushions. I didn't open it to a specific page. It just fell open to a picture of Rosemary and me taken about 30 years ago. We were standing in front of the house, the frame only half finished behind us. We were young, covered in sawdust, and smiling with the bone-deep satisfaction of people building their own dream. Tucked behind the photo was a small, crisp business card. It was cream-colored with simple, elegant black lettering: Simone Jacobs, Esquire, Estate and Trust Law. Rosemary had insisted we see her a few years back to get our affairs in order, as she put it. I had forgotten all about it. Rosemary, however, had never forgotten anything, and I was beginning to realize she had seen this day coming long before I ever did. The decision was made, not with a shout, but with a quiet click in my mind, like a lock falling into place. They had declared war. They just didn't realize that I was the one who had built the fortress. I didn't turn on the lamp in the den. I didn't need it. I knew the combination to the old floor safe hidden behind a loose panel in the wall by heart. It was a clunky old thing installed back when the boys were small, and I had a bad habit of leaving cash from side jobs lying around. Rosemary had insisted on it. A place for important things, she'd said. I hadn't opened it in years. The heavy steel door groaned in protest as I swung it open. Inside, it didn't smell like money. It smelled like rosemary, a faint scent of lavender from the little sachets she used to put everywhere. There were a few pieces of her mother's jewelry, our marriage certificate, and the boys' birth certificates. But underneath it all was a stack of about a dozen hardcover ledger books, simple black and white marbled covers, the kind accountants used before everything went digital. I pulled one out. On the spine, in Rosemary's neat, perfect cursive, it read Coleman Family Ledger, 1995 to 2000. I took the stack of books to the armchair and finally switched on the small reading lamp beside it. The warm light fell across the pages. My heart started to beat a little faster. These weren't just business ledgers. I opened the first one. Every page was a testament to my wife's meticulous nature. Dates, amounts, reasons. She had recorded everything. And I mean everything. Not just the big loans for house down payments. It was all here. The $5,000 to bail Malik out of a bad business deal he made in his 20s. The $10,000 to pay off Jamal's credit card debt after his first year of college. The money for cars, for vacations, for tuition for their wives' graduate degrees. It was a secret history of our family. A story of endless giving on our part and endless taking on theirs. My hands started to tremble as I turned the pages. It was more than I ever imagined. The numbers just kept adding up, a tidal wave of entitlement. And then I saw her notes tucked into the margins of the pages. Her neat script was a little shakier in these notes, as if she was writing them late at night when the house was quiet. Next to an entry for $20,000 for Malik she had written. He said it was for a down payment. I have a bad feeling he's never going to pay it back. I need to keep a record just in case, for Ike's sake. My breath caught in my throat. She knew. She had seen this coming. She had seen the weakness in her sons, the greed in their wives, long before my own love and pride would let me. This wasn't just accounting. This was an arsenal. This was Rosemary's final gift to me, a weapon forged not of anger, but of foresight and a fierce, protective love. She had been guarding my back even from our own children, and she was still guarding it even now. I closed the book and sat in the quiet lamplight, the weight of the ledgers heavy on my lap. The rage was still there, but now it had a purpose. It had a direction. I reached for the business card I had found in the photo album. Simone Jacobs, Esquire. I picked up the phone, my fingers steady as I dialed the number. When a calm, professional voice answered, "Law Offices of Simone Jacobs." I didn't hesitate. "My name is Isaiah Coleman," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I was a client of yours a few years ago with my wife, Rosemary. I need to schedule an appointment as soon as possible. It's about her will, and it's about justice." Simone Jacobs' law office was not what I had expected. It wasn't one of those old wood-paneled places that smell of dust and old paper. Her office was on the 20th floor of a glass and steel building in downtown Brooklyn with a view that stretched all the way to the Statue of Liberty. It was a place that spoke of success of sharp minds and modern thinking. Simone Jacobs herself was a woman in her mid-30s, I guess. She was sharp-dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, and she had a handshake that was firm and direct. There was no nonsense about her. When I had met her with Rosemary, she had been respectful, patient. But now, seeing her in her element, I saw something else. A fighter. I sat in a comfortable chair opposite her large, uncluttered desk. I had the stack of Rosemary's ledgers in a canvas bag at my feet. "Mr. Coleman," she began, her voice calm and professional. "It's good to see you again, although I am deeply sorry for your loss. Rosemary was a wonderful woman. Your message said this was about her will." I nodded. "In a way," I said, "but it's about what happened last Friday night first." And so I told her everything. I told her about the dinner at the fancy soulless restaurant. I told her about the glossy brochure for Golden Meadows. I told her about their plan to sell my house, my home, and manage my money. I didn't rush. I laid it all out, piece by piece, just like I would lay a course of bricks. As I spoke, I watched her. At first, she listened with the practiced neutrality of a good lawyer, her face a mask of professional empathy. But when I told her about Tiffany's comment about getting a nice, quiet, white family into the house, I saw a flicker in her eyes. The mask slipped. The professional empathy was replaced by a flash of genuine cold anger. It was gone in a second, but I saw it. She understood. This wasn't just a family squabble over money. This was about heritage, about dignity, about the quiet, brutal ways that Black history gets erased. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, her fingers steepled in front of her. "This is appalling, Mr. Coleman," she said, her voice tight with a control that I recognized. It was the same control I had felt at that dinner table. "They presented this as a done deal, as if your consent was a mere formality." "That's exactly right," I said. "They believe I'm just a tired old man who's going to roll over and do whatever they say." "Are you?" she asked, her eyes locking onto mine. It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question. She needed to know who she was fighting for. "No, ma'am," I said, "I am not." And with that, I reached down into the canvas bag. And my wife was no one's fool either. I lifted the stack of ledgers and placed them on her polished desk. The heavy thud they made seemed to echo in the quiet office. Simone looked at the stack, a question in her eyes. "What are these?" she asked. That I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "Is Rosemary's secret weapon. It's the Coleman family ledger. She recorded every dollar we ever gave our sons, every loan they never paid back, every bailout, every single dime." Simone pulled the top ledger towards her and opened it. Her professionally manicured finger traced the lines of Rosemary's perfect script. I watched her eyes move back and forth, her expression shifting from curiosity to surprise, and then to a slow, burning, righteous fury. She spent nearly half an hour just flipping through the pages, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. The silence in the room was electric. Finally, she looked up at me, and the last shred of professional detachment was gone. "Mr. Coleman, Ike," she said, her voice now filled with a fierce energy. "This is incredible. This isn't just a diary. This is a legal document. Rosemary's notes, her meticulous records. She wasn't just keeping track. She was building a case." She stood up and began to pace behind her desk, the view of the city, a dramatic backdrop. "Their plan is based on a single flawed assumption that all the assets, the house, the $2.1 million is solely your property to be managed. But it's not. It was part of a marital estate built over 48 years. Rosemary had a stake in every brick of that house, every dollar in that account. And her will," she tapped a file on her desk, "is the key that unlocks everything." She came back to the desk, her eyes blazing. "We are not going to be on the defensive, Ike. We are going on the attack. Their greed has made them sloppy. They think they have you cornered, but you're not cornered. You're standing in an armory and you're about to hand them a bill that is 40 years past due." The plan began to form right there. A beautiful, logical, and devastatingly effective strategy. It wasn't just about stopping them. It was about teaching them a lesson they would never forget. A lesson about history, about respect, and about the quiet, formidable power of a woman who had been watching over her family, even from beyond the grave. For the first time in 6 months, I felt the heavy weight on my chest begin to lift. It was being replaced by something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope. The next 2 days were spent in Simone Jacobs' glass-walled conference room. We spread Rosemary's ledgers across the vast polished table, a dozen black and white books that looked ancient in this temple of modernity. It felt like an archaeological dig unearthing the fossil record of my family's decay. Simone was methodical, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard as she created a spreadsheet while I sat with my reading glasses perched on my nose, guiding her through the pages through the years. Each entry was a ghost. Each number had a story, a memory that I had long since buried. "Let's start with Malik," Simone said, her voice gentle but firm. I pointed to a section in the 2005 ledger, entry after entry labeled Startup Loan Urban Cape Innovations. It started at $50,000, then another $25,000 a few months later, then a final $20,000. $95,000 for a business idea that involved, as far as I could ever tell, designing fancy rooftop gardens for rich people. He was so convincing. I told Simone the memory's still clear. He had charts and projections. He used words like synergy and disruption. He said it was the future. Rosemary had her doubts. I wanted to believe in my son. Simone typed, then pointed to a small note in the margin written in Rosemary's elegant script. She read it aloud. Malik has his father's ambition but not his patience. He wants the penthouse before he's even laid the foundation. Simone looked at me. She saw it, Ike. She saw it all. We found the final entry a year later. Business folded. No return. $95,000 gone. Then we moved on to Jamal. His section of the ledger was different. It wasn't about big failed business ventures. It was about 1,000 smaller cuts. A slow, steady bleeding that had gone on for 2 decades. Here, I said, pointing to an entry from 2012. $40,000 down payment for their house in Westchester. I remembered that day. Jamal and Tiffany had found their dream home, a place far bigger than they could afford. Tiffany had cried, saying their kids deserved a yard, deserved the best schools. How could I say no to that? How could I deny my grandchildren and Rosemary? She had agreed, but with a heavy heart. Her note in the margin was just 3 words. A house of cards. We kept going page after page. The $10,000 for Jamal's luxury sedan because it was safer for the kids. The $15,000 for a family vacation to Italy that I saw on social media because they needed to make memories. Then there was the tuition for the grandkids' private school, a bill that came to us every single year totaling over $150,000. With every entry Simone added to the spreadsheet, I felt a piece of my own ignorance fall away. I had seen these as individual acts of love, of fatherly support. But laid out like this in the stark, undeniable black and white of Rosemary's accounting, I saw the pattern. It was a strategy, a sustained campaign of financial exploitation masked by the language of family and need. I could see the moment the demands escalated. It was right after each of them got married. Brenda's influence on Malik was clear, pushing him towards bigger risks, bigger asks. And Tiffany, with Tiffany Jamal's spending, had quadrupled. It was a constant performance of wealth, a lifestyle funded by our life's work. By late afternoon on the second day, Simone stopped typing. She spun her laptop around to face me. On the screen was a single number at the bottom of a very long list. My breath caught in my chest. I had never seen it all added up like that. It was a number that represented houses and cars and college degrees and vacations I had never taken. It was the price of my blindness, the grand total. Simone said, her voice cold and precise. Not accounting for nearly 30 years of inflation is $622,450.87. She didn't have to say anything else. The number spoke for itself. It was more than a quarter of my entire net worth given away, siphoned off year after year. This isn't just them taking advantage of your generosity, Ike, Simone said softly, her professional anger giving voice to my own. This is a textbook case of sustained emotional and financial exploitation. And thanks to Rosemary, she patted the stack of ledgers. We have 40 years of meticulously documented evidence to prove it. I looked at the number on the screen and I didn't feel sadness. I didn't even feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound, heavy clarity. This number was not a loss. It was the price of a lesson I had finally learned. And the bill was about to come due. After the shock of that final number settled in the room, Simone pushed the ledgers gently to one side of the massive conference table. The audit was complete. Now the real work began. She picked up a thin navy blue file folder. On the tab in her own crisp handwriting, it said, Coleman Rosemary A. She opened it and the entire energy in the room shifted. We were no longer looking at the past. We were planning the future. Their entire strategy, Ike, she began, her voice sharp and focused, is built on one fundamentally flawed assumption. They believe that upon your wife's death, you became the sole undisputed owner of all marital assets. They think the house is yours, the $2.1 million is yours, and therefore it's all subject to your decisions. Their plan is to influence pressure or, if necessary, legally challenge your ability to make those decisions. They see you as the king on the chessboard, and their goal is to checkmate you. She leaned forward, a grim, satisfied smile on her face. But they're playing the wrong game. They don't realize that the queen is still on the board, and she's more powerful than they could ever imagine. She turned a page in the file. When Rosemary and I drafted her will, she was very, very specific. She didn't just say, I leave everything to my husband. That would have been too simple, and it would have left you vulnerable. Instead, she invoked her legal right to dispose of her half of the marital estate as she saw fit. My heart began to pound. I had been there when she signed the papers, but in the haze of my early grief, the details had been a blur. "What did she do, Simone?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "She created a fortress," Simone said, her eyes gleaming with admiration. "Upon her death, her will stipulated that 80% of her share of our combined assets would be placed into an irrevocable charitable trust." She let the words sink in. An irrevocable trust, something that could not be undone, not by me, not by my sons, not by anyone. "You were named as the executive of her estate. That means you don't just have a choice in the matter. You have a sworn legal duty to enact her final wishes. You are not just a grieving husband they can push around. You are the legal instrument of your wife's final command." It was brilliant. A move so far ahead of anything I could have conceived. "A charitable trust?" I asked. "What for?" Simone's smile widened. "This is the most beautiful part, Ike." She gave it a name. "It's called the Rosemary Coleman Foundation for Young Artisans. Its sole purpose is to provide scholarships and tool grants to young men and women from your neighborhood in Queens who want to enter the skilled trades. Masonry, carpentry, plumbing, electrical work. All the things she watched you do with such pride." The air left my lungs. I leaned back in my chair, the sheer breathtaking genius of my wife washing over me. The legacy my sons had rejected the life of dirty hands. They had looked down on. Rosemary had enshrined it. She had taken the fruits of that labor and planted a garden for a new generation of builders right in the community we came from. She wasn't just protecting me from their greed. She was ensuring that the spirit of our life's work would continue long after we were all gone. She was playing chess while I was still playing checkers. I felt a wave of love for her so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. She was gone, but she was still here, still fighting for me, still showing me the way. Simone saw the look on my face and nodded softly. She was a remarkable woman, Ike. Now it's our turn to honor her legacy and execute her plan. I left Simone's office that afternoon with a clear head and a heavy heart. The plan was in motion. All that was left was for me to play my part. I waited until the next day. I let them sweat for a night, let them wonder. Then from the quiet of my own kitchen, with the stack of Rosemary's ledgers sitting on the table like a silent jury, I made the call. I dialed Malik, my eldest. He picked up on the second ring, his voice weary, cautious. "Dad, everything okay?" I took a deep breath and summoned the voice of a broken man. I made it sound thin, brittle, like an old piece of wood on the verge of snapping. I hated the taste of the words in my mouth, but every lie was a nail in their coffin. "Son," I began, letting out a long, weary sigh. "I've had some time to think about our dinner, about everything." I let the silence hang there, forcing him to speak. And he asked, unable to hide the impatience in his voice. "You were right." I said the words, feeling like ash in my mouth. "You were all right. It's too much for me now. The house, the yard, the memories. I'm tired, Malik. I'm just so tired." I could almost hear the triumphant smile forming on his face through the phone. His voice changed, becoming thick with fake sympathy. "Oh, Dad, we're so glad you see it our way. We were so worried. This is for the best, really. For everyone." "I know, son," I said, playing my final card. "That's why I've already called my lawyer, Miss Jacobs. I've asked her to arrange a meeting for next week to go over the will, the paperwork for the house sale, all of it. I want to get my affairs in order before I make the move." That was the magic word, the will, the final confirmation of his victory. The excitement in his voice was now impossible to contain. "Of course, Dad, absolutely, that's a great idea. Very responsible. Just let us know the time and place and we'll all be there. Don't you worry about a thing." He was in such a hurry to celebrate. He got careless. He must have turned his head away from the phone, thinking the call was over, thinking his defeated old father couldn't hear him shout to his wife in the other room. But I heard it. Clear as a bell, I heard him yell, his voice full of giddy triumph. "He caved. Brenda, he caved. He's doing it." The old man finally folded, and then I heard her voice, a high-pitched shriek of pure, ugly joy in the background. I told you that sob story about the grandkids' future would work." I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, and listened to the sound of my own heart breaking for the final time. There was no sadness for their father's decision, no compassion for the man they thought they had broken. Just the raw, naked sound of a successful corporate takeover. They had taken the bait, all of it. I quietly pressed the end call button, cutting off their celebration. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. The day of the meeting arrived with a crisp autumn chill in the air. I walked into Simone Jacobs' conference room 5 minutes early. I wanted to be seated to be a fixed point in the room when they arrived, and arrived they did exactly on time. Not as a family, but as a corporate raiding party. They were dressed for the occasion. Malik and Jamal wore sharp dark suits. Brenda was in a tailored red dress that probably cost more than my first car. And Tiffany wore a cream-colored pantsuit that looked like it was made for closing a hostile takeover. They filled the room with an energy that was loud and self-congratulatory, a stark contrast to the quiet dignity of the space. They greeted me with the same hollow bony hugs as before, their eyes already looking past me, scanning the room as if they were assessing its value. "Nice place, Dad," Malik said, taking the seat opposite me. "Must be costing you a pretty penny." Brenda sat beside him, placing her designer handbag on the table with a soft thud. "It's an investment, honey," she said, winking at Malik. "An investment in a smooth, professional transition for the family." They didn't even try to hide it. They were buzzing electric with their impending victory. Tiffany pulled out her phone and started scrolling through pictures. "I was talking to a designer this morning," she announced to no one in particular, though her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "She has the most incredible ideas for the Queen's property. We'll have to gut it, of course. Open concept, lots of glass. It's going to be spectacular." Jamal nodded along eagerly like a puppy waiting for a treat. "She thinks we can flip it for at least $3 million, maybe 3.5 once it's done," he added, looking to his wife for approval. I just sat and watched them. I watched them divide up my life, my home, my legacy, like vultures divvying up a carcass. They spoke of my future as a settled matter, a logistical detail in their grand financial plan. They had forgotten I was even in the room. I was no longer a father. I was a transaction. And as Simone Jacobs walked into the room, a stack of files in her arms and a look of cold, sharp focus on her face, I knew with absolute certainty that this transaction was about to be declined. Simone Jacobs sat at the head of the table and placed her files neatly in front of her. The air was thick with anticipation. My children and their wives leaned forward in their chairs, their eyes fixed on the file that presumably contained my last will and testament. They looked like runners in their starting blocks, waiting for the pistol shot that would begin their race to riches. Simone cleared her throat to speak, but I gently raised my hand, a small gesture that silenced the room. All eyes turned to me. "Before my lawyer begins," I said, my voice calm and even, cutting through the tense silence, "I think it's important that we have a clear and honest accounting of the past. You've all presented me with a very detailed plan for my future, a future based on your concerns and your numbers. I agree that any plan for the future must be built on a foundation of truth, and the truth," I paused, letting the words settle, "is always in the numbers." I reached down into the simple canvas bag I had placed by my chair. I didn't pull out one folder. I pulled out 4. They were simple manila folders, but each one was thick and heavy with paper on each tab. Of a name was neatly written: Malik and Brenda, Jamal and Tiffany. I took the first 2 and slid them across the polished wood of the table until they stopped directly in front of Malik. Then I slid the next 2 over to Jamal. They stared at the folders as if they were venomous snakes. The smug confidence on their faces was replaced by a look of profound confusion. Brenda was the first to speak, her voice sharp with annoyance. "What is this, Ike? Some kind of last-minute sentimentality? We don't have time for scrapbooking." I said nothing. I just looked at her and nodded toward the folder. Hesitantly, Malik opened his. His eyes fell on the cover sheet, and I watched the color drain from his face. Jamal and Tiffany quickly followed suit, and a wave of shocked silence washed over their side of the table. As they stared frozen, I described what they were seeing, my voice, a quiet, steady narration of their own history. The cover page, as you can see, has a title: The Coleman Family Ledger and Accounting of Investments Made. And below that, a final number: the total sum of money Rosemary and I gave you over the past 30 years. I believe for you, Malik and Brenda, that number is $345,000, and for you, Jamal and Tiffany, yours is a little less: $277,000. Tiffany let out a small, strangled gasp. Her mind, the mind of a real estate agent, was probably the quickest to grasp the enormity of that figure. They began flipping through the pages frantically, their hands trembling. The first section, my voice continued calm and relentless, is labeled, "No interest, no term loans." That was your mother's polite term for gifts you never intended to pay back. Then comes educational investments for the college degrees you earned and the graduate programs your wives attended. That's followed by emergency bailouts, a section I see is particularly long in your folder, Malik. But it was the last section that truly broke them. And at the very back, I said, my voice softening slightly, you will find scanned high-resolution copies of your mother's handwritten notes from the margins of her ledgers. I watched Brenda's eyes scan a page. I knew the one she was reading. It was a note next to a $50,000 entry for one of Malik's failed businesses. Malik came to us with charts and dreams today. Rosemary had written, I pray he succeeds, but I fear he has his father's ambition without his willingness to get his hands dirty. I am giving him this money out of love for my husband, not faith in my son. The screaming hadn't started yet. That would come later. For now, there was just a beautiful, stunned silence. The silence of a perfectly executed trap as four people were forced to read the story of their own greed written in their dead mother's hand. The stunned silence held for a long, beautiful moment. It was the sound of four greedy minds frantically trying to process a reality they had not prepared for. Brenda was the first to break. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor as she shot to her feet, her face a mask of furious disbelief. What is this? She hissed, her voice trembling with rage. What is this nonsense? An invasion of privacy? That's what this is. Where did you get these? Did you forge them? You can't do this. These are just the ramblings of a sick old woman. Tiffany, her face pale and splotchy, quickly followed suit, her voice high and shrill. This is completely inadmissible. It's hearsay. You can't just bring in some dusty old notebooks and pretend they're legal documents. Our lawyers will tear this to shreds. This is character assassination. The two women were a storm of denial and accusation, their voices rising, echoing off the glass walls of the conference room. My sons, however, were a different story. They were silent, stunned. They had just read their mother's private thoughts, her disappointment in them written in her own hand. Malik finally found his voice, but it was weak sputtering. Dad, this isn't what it looks like. We were always going to pay you back. Those were loans. When things got better, we were going to make it right. His words were hollow, a pathetic attempt to rebuild the fantasy that had just been shattered. Jamal, my youngest, said nothing at all. He just sat there staring at the folder, his face as white as a sheet. His silence seemed to infuriate his wife more than anything else. Say something, Jamal, Tiffany shrieked, turning on him. Don't just sit there like a child. Your father is sitting there accusing us of being thieves. And that's when their united front completely crumbled. They turned on each other, the greed that had bound them together now becoming the weapon that tore them apart. I told you we should have been more careful, Brenda snarled at Malik. I told you your father wasn't as stupid as he looked. Malik flinched as if she had slapped him. Don't put this on me, he shot back. Your can't-miss real estate deal is what cost us 50 grand. I just sat there. I didn't say a word. I was the calm eye of the hurricane I had unleashed. I watched them. I watched the ugly, desperate panic that had replaced their smug confidence. It was all coming out now. The resentments, the blame, the years of whispered complaints. They weren't a family. They were co-conspirators in a failed heist, and they were trying to decide who was going to take the fall. My narration could have been written by Rosemary herself. She always said that pressure doesn't build character, it reveals it. And what was being revealed in this room was ugly, weak, and rotten to the core. And just like that, the performance was over. The screaming had finally begun. The chaos in the room reached a fever pitch. Brenda was yelling at Malik. Tiffany was screaming at Jamal. And my sons were just trying to defend themselves, their voices lost in the storm of their wives' fury. I remained silent, watching the alliances crumble, watching the ugly truth of their relationship spill out onto the expensive conference table, just as it felt like the room would physically explode. Simone Jacobs acted. She didn't raise her voice. She simply took a heavy leather-bound folder and closed it with a loud, sharp crack. The sound cut through the noise like a gunshot. Everyone froze, their angry words dying in their throats. They all turned to look at her. In the sudden ringing silence, Simone looked at each of them, her expression unreadable, her authority absolute. That is enough, she said, her voice calm, but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. She let the silence stretch for another moment, forcing them to confront the ugliness of their own behavior. Then she placed her hands flat on the folder in front of her. This meeting, she announced, her voice formal and precise, is now in session. We are gathered for the official reading of the last will and testament of. She paused, her eyes sweeping over their four expectant faces. They were leaning forward, waiting to hear my name, waiting for the final confirmation that their plan had worked. Rosemary Ann Coleman. The words dropped into the room like stones into a perfectly still pond. 4 faces, which had been contorted with rage and greed just moments before, were now slack with utter uncomprehending shock. Brenda's mouth hung open slightly. Tiffany just stared, her eyes wide, blinking as if she couldn't understand the words she had just heard. They looked at me, then back at Simone, their minds scrambling to catch up. "What are you talking about?" Malik finally stammered. Her will. "That was all settled years ago. Everything went to Dad." Simone gave him a thin, cold smile. "That is a common but incorrect assumption," she said, opening the folder. "Your mother was a far more sophisticated planner than you ever gave her credit for." She cleared her throat and began to read in a clear, measured voice. I listened, my heart swelling with a painful, profound pride. She read through the opening legal formalities, and then she arrived at the heart of the matter. Article 4, she announced, disposition of marital assets. My narration could never do justice to the simple, devastating elegance of my wife's final words, but their meaning was clear. Simone read the clause that stated that upon her death, 80% of her legal half of our shared marital estate was to be placed immediately into an irrevocable charitable trust. A trust that had been legally established and was waiting dormant for this very moment. A trust that could never be broken. The trust will be known. Simone continued reading directly from the document as the Rosemary Coleman Foundation for Young Artisans. Its mission is to provide scholarships and tool grants to young men and women from the borough of Queens, New York, who wish to pursue a career in the skilled trades, including but not limited to masonry, carpentry, plumbing, and electrical work. She looked up from the page directly at my sons. The color had completely drained from their faces. My wife, my brilliant, beautiful wife, was taking the kingdom. They had rejected the life's work they had scorned, and she was giving it to strangers. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was a statement of values, a testament written in the language of the law that building something with your own 2 hands mattered. It was her final perfect lesson, and my sons were finally unwillingly sitting in her classroom. Brenda was the first to find her voice, her words a desperate, strangled whisper. "What about the rest? The other 20%? What about our share?" She was clinging to the last piece of wreckage in the storm, her eyes darting between me and Simone. Simone looked down at the will, her face impassive. She turned a page. Article 5, she announced, her voice cutting through the room. Distribution of remaining assets. A tiny flicker of hope sparked in their eyes. Simone continued. The remaining 20% of the estate shall be divided equally between my beloved sons, Malik Coleman and Jamal Coleman. She paused, letting that small hope bloom for a single cruel second before she utterly destroyed it. "However," she said, her eyes lifting from the page to look directly at them, "this distribution is contingent upon the settlement of all outstanding personal loans recorded in the family ledgers maintained by myself. These debts are to be deducted from any potential inheritance before disbursement." Simone closed the folder softly. "As the documented debts to each of your households far exceed your share of the inheritance, the final distribution amount for both Malik Coleman and Jamal Coleman is therefore 0. 0. That one word hung in the air, a perfect, beautiful, devastating nothing. The fight finally went out of their eyes. It was replaced by a hollow, empty shock, the look of people who had gambled everything and lost. And with that single word, 40 years of taking was finally balanced. The books were closed. The debt was paid. I didn't stay to watch the full extent of the carnage. I had seen enough. While they were all still frozen, staring into the financial abyss that had just opened up beneath them, I slowly pushed my chair back from the table. The sound it made scraping against the floor seemed to break their trance. As I stood up, the dam of their shock finally broke. The screaming started again, but it was different this time. It wasn't the sound of righteous anger. It was the ugly, frantic sound of rats fighting in a trap they had built for themselves. "This is your fault," Brenda shrieked at Malik, her voice cracking. "Your stupid, half-baked schemes. You were always so weak." Tiffany turned on Jamal, her face twisted with a venom I had never seen before. "I married you for a better life, not to be in debt to a dead woman," Jamal finally yelled back, his voice thin and ready. "It was your idea to sell the house. Your idea." Their voices rose in a chaotic symphony of blame and recrimination. I didn't say a word. I just looked at Simone, who gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. My part in this was over. I turned my back on the screaming, on the hatred, on the wreckage of what was once my family, and I walked out of the room. Their shouts followed me down the long, quiet hallway, but with every step I took, their voices grew fainter. By the time I stepped into the elevator, the sound had faded completely, and all I could hear was the beautiful welcome sound of my own peace returning to me at last. A year can feel like a lifetime, or it can pass in the blink of an eye. For me, it has been both. The year since I walked out of that conference room has been the quietest of my life, but it has also been the fullest. The house no longer feels empty. It's not filled with ghosts anymore. It's filled with purpose. Today, I'm not in my workshop. I'm standing at a podium in the auditorium of the local community college, the same one my sons refused to even consider attending. The room is packed, not with corporate raiders and expensive suits, but with hard-working families from my neighborhood. There are parents in work uniforms, tired but proud. There are young men and women, their faces bright with a nervous, hopeful energy. The banner hanging behind me says in elegant gold letters the first annual Rosemary Coleman Foundation for Young Artisans Awards Ceremony. It's our first year and we're giving out 10 scholarships, 10 full grants to cover tuition, and a complete set of brand new tools for a new generation of builders. I look out at the crowd and I see myself. I see Rosemary. I see the hunger and the hope of people who just want a chance to build something real, something lasting. When I call the last name, a young woman named Kesha Roberts, the whole room erupts in applause. She's a tiny thing no more than 18 years old, but she walks up to the stage with a confidence that fills the whole room. She wants to be a master carpenter. I shake her hand and her grip is firm, her palms already calloused. I hand her the oversized check and then I hand her a beautiful leather-bound toolbox, the same kind I would have given my own sons had they wanted it. She looks at me, her eyes shining with tears she refuses to let fall. "Thank you, Mr. Coleman," she says, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't know what this means. My dad, he was a builder too." I just smile and pat her hand. "Yes, I do, young lady," I say. "I know exactly what it means. Now go make your father proud. Make my wife proud." As she walks off the stage, clutching that toolbox like the treasure, it is a feeling of peace settles over me. So profound and complete it feels like a warm embrace. This is my legacy. This is Rosemary's legacy. It's not in a bank account. It's not in a stock portfolio. It's here in the hands and the hearts of the next generation. As I stand here watching a new generation pick up the tools my sons threw away, I sometimes wonder what happened to them. I don't have to wonder too hard. The fallout from that day was swift and brutal. Malik and Brenda's marriage, a partnership built on greed, couldn't survive the sudden bankruptcy. They lost their house, their cars, and eventually each other. I hear he's working in logistics again, back in the same kind of middle management job he always despised. Brenda, I'm told, moved back in with her mother. Jamal and Tiffany tried to hold on. They sold their big house in Westchester and moved into a small apartment. But the foundation of their life together was just as rotten. Tiffany couldn't respect a man who couldn't provide the lifestyle she wanted, and Jamal couldn't live with a woman who only saw him as a failed investment. They separated 6 months ago. Sometimes late at night, Jamal calls me. The calls are awkward, full of long silences. He doesn't apologize, not in so many words, but he asks about the foundation. He asks about the young people we're helping. And in his questions, I hear the faint echo of the son I once knew. Maybe one day he'll find his way back. Maybe not. But my life is no longer defined by their choices. My days are filled with purpose. I spend my time in my workshop, not just building furniture, but helping the scholarship kids with their projects. I see the pride in their eyes as they learn to shape wood and stone. I see their futures taking shape, built on the solid foundation of hard work and skill. My sons thought my legacy was a number in a bank account. They were wrong. A true legacy isn't what you leave for people. It's what you leave in people. Rosemary knew that. And now, surrounded by the sounds of saws and hammers and a life filled with peace and purpose, I finally understand it too. This whole experience taught me a hard but necessary lesson. Family is not an unbreakable bond. It is a garden that must be tended with mutual respect. When it's overtaken by the weeds of entitlement and greed, you have to be strong enough to pull them out, no matter how much it hurts. My wife Rosemary knew that a true legacy isn't about the money you leave behind for your children, but the values you build within your community. Protecting your life's work and your own dignity is not selfishness. It is the final and most important job of a lifetime. What do you believe makes a true legacy? I would love to read your thoughts in the comments below.